Hello everyone, my name is Liz, and these are the top books I read in 2023. I definitely entered my kind of reading error this year, especially towards the latter half of the year. And I wanted to put together this video because I've really enjoyed seeing what other people have read and their ratings, so I wanted to give my top books. One caveat is I read a very eclectic mix of books. I don't stick with one genre, so you'll see nonfiction, you'll see memoirs, you'll see fantasy, you'll see romance, you'll see young adult, a whole mix of things here in this video. But yeah, let's just kick off first with the nonfiction, and then we'll skip to the fiction. I definitely challenge you, if you're maybe only a fiction reader, to try out some of these nonfiction, but if you do want to just skip to the fiction section, I'll put a timestamp here so you can just skip around. So I'm going to kick it off with what I categorize as like health and wellness. So for me, the top book I've read this year, and you can tell by my tabs here, is definitely The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. I wish I had discovered this book earlier. The author of this book has spent his whole career working in this space, and he tells lots of stories throughout it. I think everyone should read this book because I think everyone has some sort of trauma they're dealing with, and if you don't, you definitely know somebody who does. And it really talks in detail about how we kind of learn to mask trauma as we age, but how it really is internalized in our bodies and how it can cause all sorts of different health issues down the line. I have actually gifted this book to multiple people, so I definitely highly recommend this book. The top book I read in memoir, which I adore memoirs, so I do have some honorable mentions for this as well, and I'm going to put up here on the screen because I get most of my books from the library and I just put them on my Kindle. The top memoir I read this year is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Now this is such a powerfully written memoir. I definitely cried a lot during it. Chanel recounts her experience receiving sexual assault from Brock Turner, and she recounts in just such a raw, beautiful way by just like recounting her story and her experience going through the justice system. And you can really feel just how messed up the justice system is and how it does not serve people who have received sexual assault. I really highly recommend the audio version of that book, because Chanel narrates it herself, which I love it when memoirs do that. And she definitely gets choked up a few times, and I cried with her. And it was just, it's so powerfully written. I couldn't recommend it enough. I thought it was amazing. I have two honorable mentions under this category. One is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And if you're like me, you were probably like, initially when you saw that title, like, oh, that doesn't seem very nice. But you definitely understand as you read the book why she has that title, and she somehow summarizes such a serious subject but adds so much comedy in the mix, which really makes it feel less kind of heavy. And I don't know, I just like it when sometimes people can kind of make fun of their trauma a little bit. I know I definitely do that myself. She, for those who don't know, she was a child actor on iCarly. She talks about that, but a lot of it's focused on her really messed up relationship with her mother. I feel like Jeanette did such a good job at capturing the mixed emotions of her mom's death, because, you know, as a parent, you're always gonna love that parent, but obviously when that parent doesn't treat you well, that's going to impact it. And she just, I think, did a really great job of capturing some of those mixed emotions. Definitely look up the trigger warnings though, because there definitely are some. I know Jeanette talks about her eating disorder a lot, so if that's something you suffer from, you might want to stay clear. But I thought it was a really, really good book. Okay, my next honorable mention under the memoir category is Beyond the Wand, The Magic and Mayhem of Growing Up a Wizard by Tom Felton. So for those who don't know who Tom Felton is, he's one who played Malfoy in the Harry Potter series. And I was such a Harry Potter nerd that I immediately, when I heard that he was coming out with the book, I wanted to get it right away. And it was so good. I thought he wrote it just so interesting because he threw in a lot of like Harry Potter references throughout it. So it was just done kind of funnily in there. And so if you're a Harry Potter fan, you're going to like this. It was also really interesting just learning kind of the behind the scenes. And yeah, he just talks about his whole experience with that. I really enjoyed that book. So the next category I'm calling adventure travel. For those that don't know, I have an adventure travel YouTube channel, Pursuing Mountains. I can link it down below if you want to check it out. And I obviously do a lot of adventure travel, so I always like to include a category for this. I didn't read as many in this category as I usually would, I feel like, because I was living so much adventure and travel this year. I did a lot of really epic things, and I've noticed sometimes when I'm doing those things, I tend to consume less of the thing I'm doing, if that makes sense. But anyways, I have 2 books for this category. The first one is Miles from Nowhere by Barbara Savage. And this was actually about 45 years ago that this took place. She cycled for 2 years around the world with her husband. And it was really interesting just hearing her story, because I just actually did a long bike trip with my husband. We spent 10 weeks cycling across Europe from London to Istanbul. And so I just related to so many aspects of this book, even though it was written 45 years ago, which is crazy that so much of it still holds true. And I really enjoyed it. If you've ever thought about doing a long cycling tour, definitely I would recommend that book, because it really gives you kind of in-depth, like I couldn't believe how much I could relate to on this book as someone who's now done a long cycling tour. I want to make sure I get the full title for this one because it's a long one. The Push, A Climber's Journey of Endurance, Risk, and Going Beyond the Limits by Tomic Habits. So for those who don't know who Tomic Habits is, he's one of the most famous rock climbers in the world, I feel like. He soloed the Dawn Wall, and this is his experience with that. He also gives a background on his whole childhood and how he got to that point. And I love it when adventure books do that, where they really dive into how they get to doing the epic things they do. And that really was done in this book. And I thought it was really well done, and it just showed how hard, like you might just see a news article on, oh, he soloed the Dawn Wall, and you'll think, oh, that's awesome, but you don't understand like all the many years of preparation that went into being able to do that amazing feat. And I thought Tommy did a really good job explaining that. So yeah, I thought that was really well written and highly recommend. The next category I'm calling World, Political, Economical, Historical category, mainly just because I wanted to talk about this one specific book that I read in that category, and that is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. This book was so eye-opening, and I just highly recommend if you've ever traveled to a developing country or ever plan to travel to a developing country. Actually, pretty much anyone, I recommend you read this book. So the author is, I believe he was from Ghana, and he spent his entire career researching economics and how that impacted the development of Africa, using the developmental scales that is used to measure, a developed nation. And it was really interesting because he really goes in depth about, like, he first starts with, the baseline of where Africa and Europe were before Europe interfered with Africa. And you can see that they were on more or less equal economic planes. And then you can see as the scales are tipped, as Europe starts getting involved in Africa, how that causes the economy in Europe to skyrocket, but it's at the cost of Africa. And it was just super interesting. It's so historically and economically and everything very dense book, but I thought I think it's really important factors that everyone should know. So I just wanted to give that caveat, because it did take me a number of months to get through, because I did feel like I had to kind of take it slowly to digest it properly, because it's super dense. I highly recommend for everyone really to read, or at least to understand the concepts of it. So one of my top books in the self-improvement category was Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. The reason this is one of my top books is because I think I really needed this book at that time. And, sometimes that's just for self-improvement in particular, that's what's going to impact you, is what you really need at that time. And at this point, I had been really recovering from a work-induced mental breakdown that I had experienced. And so I really needed to hear some of the messages from this book. This book talks about the busyness culture in our society and how that's affecting our happiness and our ability to live happy lives. When you talk with people, you talk about how busy you are. That's the first subject that comes up. And ever since reading this book, I try never to mention that. And I'm really sensitive now when I hear that, because I feel like now my frame of mind is busyness is that's something you need to solve. That's not something to wear as a badge of honor. My whole frame of mind has completely changed after reading this book. And I now try to allow time each day where I'm just not having extra stimuli. I feel like it's so tempting to always have something going on, a podcast, an audiobook, something, but this book really kind of made me have just periods of time where there is no stimulation and I can just think, and it's great. So highly recommend that book, especially if you're a recovering workaholic like myself. Okay, so the next book is The Comfort Crisis, Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, and Healthy Self. So complete opposite spectrum of the last book. This one's all about getting outside your comfort zone and really pushing your body and mind to the limits. It's really chocked full of tons of research too about how this is good for your health, to really step outside of your comfort zone. And honestly, when I first heard about this book, like I kept seeing it pop up under people's recommended books, I thought, oh, I don't need to read this book. I put myself through a lot of discomfort. If you've seen our other YouTube channel, you kind of understand that. And so I really didn't think I'd get much from this book, but I actually really did. And I found it really actually motivating me to push myself even further. The next book in this category, I'm not going to go into detail because I feel like everyone probably knows about this book by now, but Tomic Habits. I'll put it here on the screen. I thought this book was really great too, and I've taken some lessons I've learned from that book and applied it in my life. So definitely highly recommend that book as well. Now let's move on to top fiction books of the year. First, I'm going to start with historical war fiction, and my top book from the year for that was 1,000 Splendid Suns. This book was so powerful. I cried hysterically reading this book. I listened to it on audio book because while I was biking from London to Istanbul, and I definitely, like, when we took a lunch break, full on bawled, like, not just like tears, like I was bawling hysterically. But I highly recommend this book. Don't let that scare you. I feel like it has to be a powerfully written book if it can cause that type of emotional reaction. So the book is written by Khalid Hosseini. He's an Afghan American, and he tells the story of two young women, and you follow them throughout their lives who grew up in Afghanistan in different circumstances. And it was just, I don't know how he manages, and I've read a couple of his books, but he manages to capture the feeling of being there so well. Like, I felt like I was really seeing what it was like to be like a woman and grow up in Afghanistan. And I just thought it was so beautifully written. So my honorable mention was The Book Thief. And this book was super interesting. I don't think I've ever read a book quite like this. Death is actually the narrator in this book. And you kind of love Death. He's such a character, and I don't know, I thought it was very unique how that was done. Some of the like things in it will just stand out to me. Like, there's this guy in their basement at one point who has these fantasies of like boxing Hitler, and I don't know, it's just, I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of this book. It is sad, and like, I'm usually a crier, guys. I usually cry a lot. But I think because it was done where, like, you get to know Death, and I don't know, it was like, you felt comfortable with how things ended because they're in Death's hand, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I thought that was a really interesting book. I'm really glad I read that. The top fantasy book I read this year was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I was obsessed with this book. I discovered booktube or whatever this year, and I saw it all over the place. So I finally picked it up, and I hadn't read much fantasy in so long, and I'm so glad I did because now it's gotten me really into fantasy. It's about dragons, and I thought when I first heard that, I was like, oh, I don't know, that seems weird. But you end up loving the dragon dynamic in the book, and it has a deeper meaning as well. She has some physical disabilities, and she has to modify for that. It has some Harry Potter and Hunger Games vibes to me. It really reminded me of like kind of like an adult version of some aspects of those books, and I just wanted to live in that world. I didn't want to leave. I would tell my husband I just kind of wanted to be in that world for a while. And I think that just shows that it was a very well-written book. I really enjoyed it. I have two honorable mentions under this category. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I loved this book. I thought it was so interesting seeing her through time. The book is about a girl who makes a deal with the devil, essentially. And of course, because it's the devil, her wording wasn't exactly correct, so it kind of sentenced her to this life where people forget her as soon as they meet her. So like she'll walk away, and you know, as soon as she turns away, they've forgotten her. It follows her through time, in different cities as she experiences this. I thought it was so beautiful seeing that process, and it had a really beautiful meaning too about like how important it is, the feeling of like having an impact in the world. And yeah, I loved the ending of that book. It was so good. Honestly, I debated that one for the top book because I'm like, just the ending and everything, how it accumulated was just so beautiful. But highly, highly recommend that book. Another honorable mention is I read the entire A Court of Thorns and Roses series, at least that's out so far. And I loved book 2 and 3. I just really enjoyed it. I didn't think I would, honestly. I never thought I would ever be the type to read about fairies and enjoy it. But this year was about embracing new things, and I really enjoyed it. I think I used to have this perception that everything I needed to read needed to be super like, I don't know, cerebral and needed to have meaning. And this year I've kind of embraced just reading for fun. It's really taken over a lot of my screen time, and that's gone way down. So yeah, I've just read a lot of fun books. So let's go into some more. Top romance I read this year. This was hard because I've read quite a bit in this category, but I think for me, The Things We Leave Unfinished was my top. And that was actually by Rebecca Yarros as well. So Rebecca has made 2 appearances, this author, on my list. I loved this book, really particularly for the World War II aspect of it. So there's a dual tie line in present day and then World War II following the woman's grandma. That love story during World War II is just so cute, and that's really what made the book for me. And there's a twist at the end I just did not see coming, and I loved this book. I loved reading about it. It makes me think I need to read more historical romances. I think I would enjoy it. So if you guys have any, let me know in the comments. Alright, and then my top rom-com this year was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I really love this author. I've read every single one of her books so far. It's like a beach read. It's simple. It doesn't require much brain power, but they're just fun to read, and there's always some other serious aspects. So it doesn't feel like you're just eating candy. There's some other aspect to it as well. And this book in particular I related to so well because one of the main characters suffers from anxiety, and particularly social anxiety. And it really explores that dynamic of being in a relationship with someone who has anxiety and social anxiety. Kind of the appropriate way to be in that relationship. It's not about fixing that person at all, which I really enjoyed. It's about like how you can support that person. And I just really related to that, and I really liked how it was portrayed, how to really be an effective partner in a relationship like that. So I definitely highly recommend that book. Another honorable mention, I wasn't sure how to categorize this, but I read the 7-Year Slip, and I really enjoyed it. I actually almost DNF'd it though at first. Like I almost put it aside because I was like, this just seems like a typical romance book, and I just wasn't in the mood for that. But it ends up being so deep, especially towards the end, and it really explores kind of about change. I think it's a really great book if you're on the kind of the cusp of changing. It really explores that aspect of like how, you know, you change over time and how your old self isn't maybe different than your current self, but that's okay. Yeah, I cried. I did not expect to cry during a book that essentially, for those that don't know, the book is essentially about a woman whose apartment slips back in time 7 years, and there's a romance in there, and I didn't anticipate crying during a book like that, but I did. So it definitely touched some nerve, and it talks about a lot about her relationship with her aunt, who's definitely quite a bit like me. She loves to travel. She's always kind of nomadic, and yeah, I just liked hearing about her relationship with her aunt too. So definitely recommend that book. My top mystery thriller category book this year is actually a young adult mystery thriller. I read actually a number of books in this category, and I've kind of determined I just don't like disturbing mystery thrillers, and I feel like a lot of them I read this year are just kind of like really disturbing and make you feel like gross after you read it. And I don't know, I just have decided I really enjoy not disturbing mystery thrillers. So my top one was actually a young adult mystery thriller this year, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. If you've liked true crime podcasts, it kind of feels like that, but in book form. And I really liked the character Pip. She was really cute. It just follows this mystery she uncovers for like her final senior capstone project about a town murder that happened, and kind of uncovering the truth about that over the course of her school year. And yeah, I really enjoyed that book and highly recommend. this one I didn't know how to categorize this book, but I read Lov Less this year and I really enjoyed that as well. So that one is a fictional book, but the author herself experiences what one of the characters in here does. So this book explores kind of what it's like to be asexual and kind of the different facets that I really hadn't considered until I read this book that go along with that. Like, our whole society is really based around the romantic relationships, and like when that's not in the picture, how do you build a life around it? And I just thought that was really well written. I really read this because I wanted to be a better ally for people in my life who are asexual, and I really think I have a much better understanding after reading it. And like I said, the author herself is asexual, and she infused a lot of her experiences as she was kind of coming to terms with that growing up. And so highly recommend that book. All right, guys, we got through the whole list. Those are all my top books I read by genre this year. I hope you guys get some books that you like from this. I'd love to hear from you guys. What were some of the top books you read this year? I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.